What's up everyone, my name is Joseph and welcome back to another Casually Competitive gameplay video, where our goal is to provide you with semi-competitive EDH content that is both fast-paced and entertaining. In today's video, we wanted to dial the power level back a little bit compared to what we've done in the past and show you what some more casual commanders can do. Now, these decks aren't necessarily casual, they're still fairly optimized, and a few of them even contain some combos, but in general, they're a little bit slower, rely a little bit more on combat damage, or just take a few extra pieces to assemble. That being said, this video is still very exciting and I think you'll enjoy it. But now with all the disclaimers out of the way, let's get into today's video. Going first today, we have Jordan piloting a Scion of the Dragon tribal deck. And as you would expect, this deck aims to play a lot of dragons and swing with some really cool, interesting dragons. However, there are some more direct paths to victory, the main one being Aggravated Assault in combination with something like Savage Ventmaw, or you can just take infinite combat steps if you're able to do combat damage and get both these pieces on the board. Now, the benefit of having Scion of the Dragon in the command zone is that you can use his ability to get a single turn use of Savage Ventmaw, which makes the combo a little bit easier. A backup win con to this is to really just storm out with mana rocks and all the cheap small spells, and then play a massive Dragon Storm just overpowering the board. Jordan kept a full hand of 7 today, and his starting hand contained an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, a Hollowed Fountain, a Steam Vents, a Blood Crypt, a Dockside Extortionist, a Scourge of Valkas, and a Dragonlord Jamoka. Going second today, we have Joseph, piloting Chulane, Teller of Tales. This hard-to-pronounce commander really aims to just get good value off of playing a lot of creatures. There are quite a few ways to generate value from mana dorks and to use Chulane's ability to just draw a lot of cards, and there's some examples on screen, but for a full description of all the ways to work around this commander that are in this deck, definitely hit the link in the description to check out the deck list. They're all spelled out there step by step. But a quick version is the goal is to play a lot of creatures, draw a lot of cards, ramp really hard, and then overwhelm the table with a large finale of devastation. Joseph's opening hand contained 2 forests, a Mana Confluence, a Deafening Silence, an Eladamri's Call, a Droga Tree Speaker, and a Winds of Rebuke. Going third today, we have Adam playing Yuriko, the Tiger Shadow. This Dimir aggro deck really just aims to play a lot of small, unblockable creatures, play a lot of ways to manipulate the top of your library in order to attack with Yuriko or other ninjas and just flip over those giant spells to do massive damage to the table all at one time. Adam was able to keep a full 7-card hand in today's game, and that hand contained an island, 2 swamps, an Inkfathom Infiltrator, a Prismatic Lens, an Okiba Gang Shinobi, and a Temporal Trespass. And finally, we have Bill playing Kykar, Wind's Fury. This control deck aims to just stop the board from going off using counter spells or just general Jeskai control cards until he can cast Divergent Transformations, searching up the only 2 creatures in his library, Elsha of the Infinite and Spellseeker, in order to get an Elsha combo where he uses top to just draw his entire library and storm off. Bill's opening hand today contained a Mountain, a Shivan Reef, a Polluted Delta, a Chrome Mox, a Pyroblast, a Mental Misstep, and a Force of Negation. Now with the deck intros out of the way, let's get into the gameplay. Jordan starts us off in our game today by drawing for turn and playing an aggressive Steam Vents, entering tapped. He then passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph draws, plays a Mana Confluence as his land for turn, taps it, producing a white mana, and uses that mana to cast Deafening Silence. As priority gets to Bill, he wastes no time in paying 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, targeting Deafening Silence. Deafening Silence is countered, and Joseph passes the turn to Adam. Adam draws for turn, plays an island as his land for turn, and then gives the turn to Bill. Bill draws, plays a Polluted Delta, immediately cracking it, taking 1 damage to shock in a Hollowed Fountain, taking 2 more damage. He taps Hollowed Fountain to cast Preordain, scrying 2, bottoming them both, and then drawing a card. He then casts Chromox for 0 mana. As it enters, he imprints Pyroblast. He then taps Chromox for a red to cast Gamble. When Gamble resolves, he tutors up a card to his hand, and then discards 1 of his 4 cards at random. The card discarded is a Mountain. He then passes the turn. Jordan untaps, draws, plays a tapped Blood Crypt for his land for turn, and then gives the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps and draws, plays a Forest as his land for turn, and then taps that Forest to play a Droga Tree Speaker. With nothing left, he gives the turn to Adam. Adam draws, plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and then taps his 2 lands to play a Prismatic Lens. With nothing else, he gives the turn to Bill. Bill untaps his permanent, draws his card, and then plays a Shivan Reef as his land for turn. Looking to rebound off of his fantastic turn 1, he decides to tap 3 mana to put a Wheel of Fortune on the stack. When priority gets to him, Joseph taps his Mana Confluence, taking 1 damage to generate a blue, and casts Flusterstorm, with both copies targeting Wheel of Fortune. Bill is not able to pay for Flusterstorm, so Wheel of Fortune is countered, and Bill gives the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps and draws, and then plays an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth, as his land for turn. He then taps his 3 lands to put a Rhystic Study on the stack. Nobody has any responses, Rhystic Study resolves, and Jordan gives the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, plays a Forest as his land for turn. He then taps his 2 forests to level up Draga Tree Speaker, who, upon reaching level 1, can now tap for 2 green mana. He then passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, draws, plays a Swamp as his land for turn. He then spends 3 mana to cast Sage Owl, making sure to pay for the Rhystic Study trigger. As it enters the battlefield, he rearranges the top 4 cards of his library. He then taps 1 Swamp to play Changeling Outcast, not paying for Rhystic Study, allowing Jordan to draw. With nothing left to do, he passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, draws his card for turn, and then taps for 3 mana to play Frantic Search, not paying for the Rhystic Study trigger. However, in response to the Rhystic Study trigger, Joseph taps the Tree Speaker as well as his Mana Confluence, taking 1 damage to play Eladamri's Call, making sure to pay the 1 extra for Rhystic Study. Eladamri's Call resolves, Joseph tutors up a Priest of Titania to his hand, Jordan draws from the initial Rhystic Study trigger, and then Bill resolves Frantic Search, drawing 2 cards, discarding 2 cards, and then untapping 3 lands. Not able to find a land in the 2 cards he drew, and with no mana left, he gives the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps and draws, then shocks in a Hollowed Fountain as his land for turn, losing 2 life. He then taps his 4 lands to cast Taigam, Ojutai Master. In response, seeing this as a good opportunity for ramp and not wanting Jordan's stuff to be uncounterable, Bill taps 2 lands for 2 blue mana, taking 1 damage from Shivan Reef, to cast Mana Drain, targeting Taigam. It's not paying for Rhystic Study. Taigam gets countered, and Jordan, with nothing left, goes to his end step, discarding a Morophon the Boundless to hand size. He then passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, plays a Flooded Strand as his land for turn. He then taps for 3 mana to cast Priest of Titania, making sure to pay the Rhystic Study tax. He then passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps and draws, and plays an Underground River as his land for turn. He then goes to combat and swings the 1/1 Changeling Outcast at Joseph and the 1/1 Sage Owl at Bill. When no blocks are declared, Adam pays 2 mana to Commander Nijitsu Yuriko in place of the Owl, returning the Owl to hand and putting Yuriko on the battlefield. After damage is dealt, Adam reveals the top 2 cards of his library, since 2 ninjas did combat damage, and the 2 cards he reveals is Silent Blade Oni and Damnation, for a total CMC of 11. So Adam's opponents each take 11 damage. Adam then goes to his second main phase and replays Sage Owl, paying for Rhystic Study, and then rearranging the top 4 cards of his library as it enters. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, draws, and gets 4 colorless mana on his first main phase from Mana Drain. He plays a Marsh Flats as his land for turn, immediately cracking it, taking 1 damage to get a Plains to the battlefield, untapped. He then plays Kykar, Wind's Fury, by tapping 3 lands, using 1 of the Mana Drain mana for the cast, and using another 1 of the Mana Drain mana for the Rhystic Study trigger. With nothing left to play, he passes the turn to Jordan. Jordan untaps, draws, and taps 1 mana to play Mystic Remora. No one has any responses, Mystic Remora resolves, and Jordan gives the turn to Joseph. On Jordan's end step, Joseph cracks Flooded Strand, taking 1 damage to get a Hollowed Fountain to the battlefield tapped. Joseph untaps, draws, and then casts a Prowling Serpapod, not paying for the Rhystic Study tax, allowing Jordan to draw. Wanting to leave mana up, knowing what Adam's about to do, Joseph passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, draws, taps for 1 mana to play Mana Vault, paying for the Rhystic Study, but not for the Mystic Remora. Jordan draws 1 card. He then goes to combat. Adam swings the 1/1 Changeling at Bill, and the 1/1 Sage Owl, as well as his commander at Jordan. In response to declare attackers, Joseph taps his mana to cast Winds of Rebuke, targeting the Changeling, paying for the Rhystic Study tax, but not the Remora tax. Now you may be wondering why the decision was made to target the Changeling instead of the commander, and the reason for this is even if the commander is bounced, Adam can choose to put his commander back in the command zone and then ninjutsu him back out the same combat, so it wouldn't do a whole lot bouncing the commander, so Joseph decides to get rid of at least 1 ninja. So, Winds of Rebuke resolves, the Changeling is bounced, and everyone mills 2, including the 2 of the cards that Adam had rearranged the previous turn. We then continue to combat, and unfortunately, what Joseph forgot is that Adam has just enough mana to ninjutsu out Silent Blade Oni before damage is dealt, returning the Sage Owl to his hands. When combat damage is dealt, since 2 ninjas dealt combat damage to opponents, Adam reveals the top 2 cards of his library, which are a mana drain and a land. So this time it only does 2 damage to each of his opponents. However, Silent Blade Oni, upon dealing combat damage, allows Adam to look at Jordan's hands and cast the card for free this turn. Adam goes to his second main phase and does just that. He looks at Jordan's hand and casts a Dragon Lord Dramoka for free, not paying the Ristic Study tax, allowing Jordan to draw, but now having another evasive creature on the battlefield. He then plays a swamp as his land for turn and taps that swamp to play Changeling Outcast, not paying the Ristic Study tax, allowing Jordan to draw one more time. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Bill. Bill untaps, looks around the board and sees what's going on, and decides to keep some mana up and passes the turn to Jordan. On his upkeep, Jordan does not pay the cumulative upkeep of Mystic Remora and lets it go to his graveyard. He then plays a command tower as his land for turn. He then taps for 1 mana to cast a Soul Ring. He then casts a Nature's Lore, floating 1 colorless mana to tutor up a forest to the battlefield. He searches up a Stomping Ground and has it come in untapped, losing 2 more life. Then, using the floating colorless as well as 1 more red mana, he plays a Dockside Extortionist. When it enters the battlefield, Jordan gets 3 treasures. He then taps for 1 black mana to cast Reanimate, targeting Morophon in his graveyard. As Jordan passes priority, Bill and Joseph both realize that dragons is probably the best way that they're going to get out of the ninja's predicament that they've gotten themselves into, and Reanimate resolves, Morophon enters the battlefield, and Jordan loses 7 more life. And then, due to Morophon's ability, Jordan casts his commander for free. Once his commander resolves, he taps 1 land and sacrifices 3 treasures to cast Scourge of Valakis. As it enters, it does 3 damage to Adam's Changeling Outcast. With nothing left, Jordan passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps and draws, and realizes although he has a lot of mana, his hand's not helping him out too much, so he taps for 6 mana, taking 1 damage from Mana Confluence, to cast Echo of Eons, not paying for the Ristic Study tax, just looking for answers. Jordan draws a card, and then all the players take their hands, their graveyards, shuffle it into their library, and draw 7 cards. Now, a quick note here, you may notice that Joseph's graveyard is empty after this reshuffle. There should be an Echo of Eons in that graveyard, and we didn't catch it right here, but we do catch it later on, and it doesn't affect the game in any drastic way, so just keep that in mind. I just wanted to point it out. With a new grip of 7 cards in his hand, Joseph plays an Adakar Wastes as his land for turn. He then taps 3 lands, including the Adakar Wastes, taking 1 damage to generate a white mana, to cast Village Bellringer, not paying for the Ristic Study tax, and untapping his Mana Dorks as it enters. He then taps one of his Mana Dorks to play a Birds of Paradise, this time paying the Ristic Study tax. With not much left to do, he moves to his end step to pass the turn to Adam. However, on Joseph's end step, Bill taps his lands and his Chromox to play Divergent Transformations, generating a spirit on cast from Kykar, immediately sacrificing that spirit to Kykar's ability to float a red, and then targeting only Kykar with Divergent Transformations. Bill chooses to put Kykar back in the command zone rather than exiling it, and begins flipping cards over, looking for a creature. Now, if you were paying attention, he only has 2 creatures in this deck, and normally Divergent Transformations looks for both. Currently, what he's doing is looking for Spellseeker specifically. With that red mana, he could use Spellseeker to tutor up Red Elemental Blast, and then use that red mana to cast Red Elemental Blast, destroying one of Adam's blue permanents, hopefully slowing him down enough to make it another turn cycle. As he flips cards, he finds the first creature in his library, and it's Elsha of the Infinite. Not finding the creature he needed, not having any relevant mana, or having any other responses, he passes priority, and Adam starts his turn. Adam chooses not to untap Mana Vault during his upkeep, and then takes 1 damage from Mana Vault on his draw step, and draws his card for turn. He plays an island as his land for turn. He casts a Sensei's Divining Top, not paying the Ristic Study tax, allowing Jordan to draw 1 card. He then goes to combat. He swings Yuriko, Silent Blade Oni, and Dragon Lord Dramoka at Bill for 12 total damage. Bill blocks Yuriko with Elsha, and combat damage happens, and Adam gains 5 life from Dragon Lord Dramoka's life gain ability, and then in response to the Yuriko trigger, pays 1 mana to activate Sensei's Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. He then flips 1 card due to a ninja dealing damage that combat. He flips over Commit Memory, a 10 CMC card, killing Jordan, and then as combat damage resolves from the unblocked creatures, killing Bill as well. Yuriko does die to Elsha, and Adam decides to put her into the command zone. Dragonlord Jamoka also leaves the battlefield as Jordan loses the game. Adam then goes to his second main phase and taps for 4 mana to cast Damnation, killing all of the creatures on the battlefield. Damnation resolves, and Adam gives the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, looks at his life total, and decides to shock in a breeding pool, taking 2 more damage. He then taps 5 lands, taking 1 damage from Mana Confluence, to play his commander, Chulane. In response to this cast, Adam uses 1 mana to activate Sensei's Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Chulane resolves, and then Joseph passes the turn. Adam untaps, decides to not untap Mana Vault and takes 1 more damage from Mana Vault during his draw step, draws, plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and then taps his mana to cast Never, targeting Chulane. In response, Joseph takes 1 damage from a Darkar Wastes to make a blue mana to cast Swan Song, saving Chulane but giving Adam exactly what he wanted, an evasive creature. With nothing left, Adam passes the turn to Joseph. Joseph untaps, draws, and then taps for a blue mana to cast Shrieking Drake. On cast, he draws a card and puts a forest into play due to Chulane's ability. In response to the Drake's ETB, Adam generates 4 mana to play Commit, targeting Chulane. Joseph elects to place Chulane 2 cards down from the top of his library rather than putting him into the command zone. The Drake then resolves and has no other creatures to bounce, so it bounces itself back to Joseph's hand. Joseph then casts a Mana Crypt. He then casts Green Sun Zenith, X equaling 5 with 1 floating colorless in order to search up Chulane to the battlefield. While Joseph is reshuffling his library, Adam decides to take a little bit of a shortcut and pays 1 mana into Sensei's Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Another quick note here, you may also notice that Green Sun Zenith is in his graveyard rather than shuffled in. Again, it was getting pretty late and we did miss this fact. Luckily, again, we do catch this and it doesn't end up mattering too much. However, did want to point it out. But after that resolves and everything's all shuffled and ready to go, Joseph then taps Mana Confluence for a blue to take 1 more damage and cast Shrieking Drake. As it's cast, Joseph draws a card and puts a forest onto the battlefield, and then as it enters, he elects to return Chulane to his hand. With nothing left, he passes the turn to Adam. Adam untaps, decides not to untap Mana Vault, and takes another damage from Mana Vault. He then draws, plays a Swamp as his land for turn, and then casts Kykar, the Still Wind. He then hard casts Yuriko, and then goes to combat and swings the 2/2 bird at Joseph. Joseph declares no blockers and takes 2 damage. On his upkeep, Joseph wins his Mana Crypt trigger, not taking damage. He then taps for 3 mana to cast Echo of Aeons using its flashback cost to draw 7 new cards and really just try to find an answer. He elects to put Chulane into the command zone rather than shuffle him into his library. Once he draws his 7, he casts a Carpet of Flowers. In response to this cast, Adam activates Sensei's Divining Top, rearranging the top 3 cards of his library. Joseph then goes to his second main phase, adding 2 white mana from Carpet of Flowers' ability, since Adam controls 2 islands, and uses this mana to recast Chulane from the command zone. He takes 1 damage from Mana Confluence to tap it for a green to play Arbor Elf, drawing a card and putting a tapped Botanical Sanctum onto the battlefield with Chulane's ability. With nothing left to do, he gives the turn to Adam. Adam takes 1 more damage from Mana Vault by not untapping it, then draws for turn. He then casts a Mana Crypt, and then pays 4 mana to activate Higuro twice, making both Yuriko and the 2/2 bird unblockable. He goes to combat and swings 4 unblockable damage at Joseph, killing him. As the gameplay comes to a close, I want to kind of give my closing thoughts on this game as a whole. In terms of the most valuable card, I may kind of surprise some of you with the one that I do suggest, and the one that I would suggest is Sage Owl. Now, on the surface, it doesn't look like this card did a whole lot. I mean, it was just a 1/1 flyer, which is nice. It got Yuriko out once. But the fact that he was able to replay it so many times and consistently use it to organize the top of his library in order to get the highest CMC cards in the right spots was definitely a game changer. This constant manipulation really kept Adam's opponents on their back feet and really left him in the driver's seat and in control of this game, and I think Sage Owl is probably one of the biggest proponents to that, since it did come out very early and there was so many repeated uses of it. Now, Sensei's Divining Top did something very similar, and I believe he even used that more times than Sage Owl got use. However, in my opinion, it really was just that early game value that Sage Owl allowed Adam to have that kind of propelled him forward in this game. Personally, in terms of the least valuable card, there's no one card that I would personally pick out and say, you know, this was a huge negative impact on the game as a whole. A lot of the cards played did what they were supposed to, and a lot of times had decent targets and were played correctly. However, as a whole, Adam's deck was given just a little bit too much freedom and just snowballed out of control very quickly. However, that is all we have for this video. We all here at Casually Competitive hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, be sure to like the video if you did like it, subscribe if you aren't already, and let us know what you thought in the comments below. And as is customary, if you made it to this point in the video, I'll let you know what decks you can expect to see in the next video from us. Now, where this game was a little bit more on the casual side, we're actually kind of taking the opposite approach in the next video and going a little bit more on the stronger or faster side. The decks for the next video include Godo, Bandit Warlord, Zur the Enchanter, a 5-color Kenrith the Returned King deck, and finally a Thrasios and Bruce Tarl kind of Staxy Hate Bear deck. So if that's something that interests you, go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already to be notified of when that video does go live. But that is all we have for this video. Again, like I said, I hope you guys did enjoy it. My name is Joseph. This is Casually Competitive MTG, and we will see you next time.